Thank you for joining us today. I'm Laura Andradas, and together with Aske Host, on behalf of Pryme Global, we'll walk you through the Pryme CIS application. So what is the construction industry scheme? Under the construction industry scheme, also known as CIS, contractors deduct money from subcontractors' payments and pass it to the UK's tax authority. That's to say the HMRC. Those deductions count as advanced payments towards this tax authority. What does the CIS cover? Well, it covers most construction work, including a permanent or temporary building or structure, and civil engineering work. That can include decorating, the installation of heating systems, or repairs, the site construction, all this kind of stuff. So what are the associated bottlenecks for contractors dealing with this kind of tax? Of course, the manual calculation of the CIS deduction amount, difficulties for staying compliant, and the obligation to file the monthly return on time to the HMRC. That's why we at Pryme Global, we have created the Pryme CIS Tax Retention application, which is a tax calculation software for principal contractors withholding tax to subcontractors in the UK. What are the main benefits when using this application? Of course, the automated tax retention accounting, Painless tax retention reporting, and last but not least, thanks to the connection to the HMRC online platform, an easier CIS return submission. I hand it over to Aske, who will do the actual demo.
Thank you. So we're starting out in a demo company, which is a contracting company. And of course, this contractor has subcontractors. And being a UK company, there is a requirement for withholding tax as according to the CIS scheme for those subcontractors, and in different degrees depending on their status, if they're registered, and if they're registered, how they're registered. To the common user of the system, this should be mostly transparent, similar to how VAT treatment is not something the average user will care too much about when entering an order. There's a setup behind it, and for them, it's just a natural part of the system. But of course, there is some setup behind it, and we will review that as well. So the first step when working with this is to make sure that the vendor that you have a purchase for is set up for this. And so I will open up the list of vendors, and we can have a look at one of our vendors, in this case, Master Stroke Decorators. And in the invoicing section here, we will see that this vendor is set to use retention tax, which is a catch-all phrase to cover CIS, RCT, or other schemes where we withhold tax or retain tax. We've filled in identifiers like the national insurance number, the new unique tax reference, the AO reference, the payee, etc. But we can also see there's some fields we haven't filled in, and they are used for other schemes like RCT in the Ireland. We also have a verification date and a return date, and they are used to track whether this is a verified vendor. So with my vendor set up, I can start entering purchase invoices. So let's open up a purchase invoice, and I'll create a new one for this. So we received a purchase invoice from Master Stroke Decorators, and we have an invoice number on it, and we want to enter some lines. Now the line types could be of different kinds. We could track this with items, resources, or GL accounts. And in this scenario, I'll actually use items. So I will select something for some paint that was on the invoice. They used some white paint, and they used 50 cans of that. So that goes onto my invoice. And we can see here that a retention tag product posting group is selected of being materials. So this is the CIS treatment of this separate line. And knowing a bit of CIS, I can say materials are excluded or exempted from the deduction. So this line will actually not be affected, but there is a treatment and we will need to report on this number and specifically say that we do not do a deduction on it. I could also add a line for the time spent, so the labor, and I'll add that as a resource line for Catherine. And we can see here that this comes in with a code of labor because resource time is labor. And we will add 10 hours of labor on this invoice. And for the labor line, there will be a treatment of a deduction depending on the status of masterstroke decorators, how they're registered for CIS. We can then post the invoice, and it's a normal invoice posting process. The difference here is that if we look at the posted invoice and the entries, in addition to the normal entries like the VAT entries, similarly, we now also have retention tax entries where we specify what the withholding is. And in this case, this was a gross registered, so it came out to 0%. And so there's actually no actual withholding. We can see here the business tax posting group on this vendor is gross. So it comes out to 0. So there is no actual withholding. So even for those vendors where they are registered for CIS, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is withholding. Now let's take another scenario. We take a vendor which is not gross registered, like the big vendor or the big subcontractors would be, but instead we create a new invoice for a smaller contractor. In this case, let's take Sterling Construction. And we will have a look at them. And in this case, we could add this as lines for a GL account. So we will use GL accounts, and I will put in a line for materials again, materials purchased. We can see this comes in as materials, so we put that group on there. Again, I'll just put in as a single line and say there were materials for 2,000 on this line. And so there will be a special treatment of this. Similarly, if I put on something for subcontract labor, we can see that, oh, in this case, we actually have a bit of a bad setup here. So we should correct that. This should be set as labor. So let's actually go ahead and make a change to this account. And so I will go to the list here. I will open up our GL account and I'll change this and say this should not be materials. The retention tax product posting group should be labor on subcontract labor. So changing that. And so we go back again here and now we can see now it's labor. And I could also manually change it on the line if it was an account that could be used for both materials and labor. There are some cases where it can be either or. So this is why we expose this the same way that we do with the tax posting groups as well. So putting this in here and saying there were 3,000 pounds of labor. And in the same way, I will post this. And here I get a message saying you're about to post an invoice for a vendor that is no longer verified. Please be aware that you'll not be able to pay this invoice until the vendor is verified. Do you still want to continue? So this is a good warning. Sterling Construction is a new vendor or a new subcontract I never engaged with before. And I never took the time to actually check the CIS verification on them. So in this case, I get a warning. I can still continue with my invoice, but when come time to actually pay the invoice, I must do the verification. Otherwise, I will be blocked, but I will continue here. And so we get a posted invoice and we can do the same, find entries, and we can see what the values are. In this case, they are registered for CIS, meaning there's a 20% retention of the 3,000, which amounts to 600 in total. So this is the retention we now have to deduct from the payment. And so the next step would be to pay our vendors. So let's do some payments because with a CIS scheme, the actual deduction first happens when we do the payment. It is not at the time of invoicing. So in this case, we have our invoices, and let's go for this. We can see we have our Sterling construction here, and we can say create payment, and I'll create a payment. And yeah, I'll simply post this payment. This is not what it's important about, but it's to see that we now get a message saying the vendor is not CIS verified. Okay, that was right. We need to verify them. So in this case, I will go ahead and I'll open up the vendor card. In the background, I would need to do my actual check of CIS and find out that they are absolutely valid. I'll put in the verification date saying, well, I verified them as of this date. And so now they are verified, meaning I can now go back and post my payment journal. So I posted my payment, and the payment was, of course, with the deduction included. So I'm not paying the full amount. I'm paying the amount less the deduction. So where does this all end up? Well, at the end of the month, we will need to, or at the end of the period, we'll need to close the period and submit this. And this is where the concept of periods come into play. So here we can see that we have different periods, and we have a period starting on April 6th, going to the 5th of May. And in this period, we had an amount of 600 of withholding on a base amount of 5,000. So the invoice we paid was for 5,000, but we withheld 600 because, of course, there was, again, no withholding on the materials part. Let's say we're at the end of the period. We can then close this period and give that a description. I'll just give it a quick description and say we close this. And now, of course, we're into some wrong dates, but realistically, we are closing this on maybe the 16th of May. We have 2 weeks from the 6th to close this and submit it. And then I get some questions that I verify that I really want to close it because it cannot be reopened. And so this is closed. And now I have a statement. And my statement states that in this period, I paid one vendor. Notice that I had 2 invoices. I had one invoice for masterstroke decorators. I had one for Sterling construction, but I never paid the masterstroke decorators in this period, and thus they are not part of the monthly return for this period. It is only the vendors that have paid in this period. And we can see here the base amount being 5,000, materials were 2,000, and the amount withheld was 600, which was, of course, the 20% of the 3,000 of labor. So this is the basis for what I will send to the HMRC. And this could, of course, be something I manually go in and put in. And we also have a function in here to submit the statements, which, of course, I cannot really do, but I'll do it anyway. In this case, it will ask me some questions, and it will say that I really confirm that I've checked everything and everything is okay, that only the right ones are included, and I'm aware that I might be penalized if I don't submit correct information. All the questions that we have to confirm. And this then gives me a final file. In a future version, there will be an automatic submission where we will automatically upload this to the HMRC. So this is the end-to-end process, making sure the vendor is registered and verified, track the purchase invoice, and that they pay the invoice, and then, of course, close and submit the period at the end of the period. So for those with a bit of interest in what's behind this, we could have a look at the setup behind this. And what we're really defining is first of all, some posting groups. generally here for CIS. And again, this app is for CIS or for RCT, so it could be a different setup if you're using the RCT scheme for Ireland. But for CIS, we would usually have 3 groups: gross, not registered, and registered, which we classify our CIS subcontractors by. We also have our product posting groups where we designate different kinds of costs, and I've defined it as labor or materials. You could also create separate groups for plant hire, fuel, other ways of doing it. You could even have it as deductibles and non-deductibles if that's more to your liking. And we can also see that I put a category on the materials because anything that is materials needs to be specifically specified separately on the statement. So we need to be able to separate out what is materials. This together goes into a posting setup, again, very similar to what we would see with a VAT posting setup, where we do the combination of the business group and the product group, and that together then gives a percentage. And of course, there are also some accounts for the GL posting, because of course, in the background, we will also post these amounts to the general ledger. And we could have a look at a little bit of that. What goes to the general ledger? Going down into my liabilities, I will see down here that I have the CIS deducted. This is where the amount ends up when the payment is done. And then when the statement is closed, it will go into the CIS payable account. This is the setup I have. Of course, this could be different, but this is the general idea. So with that concludes the walkthrough of the functionality of the Pryme CIS and RCT retention tax app.
Thank you very much, Aske, for this demo. And if no one has any question, I would say goodbye. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.